Part 3. The King of the World, Glory and Madness. By the time Alexander reached the ancient city of Babylon in 331 BCE, he was no longer a conqueror chasing dreams. He was the dream. The banners of Persia had fallen. The cities that once ruled the East now whispered his name in awe and fear. He had done what no Greek king before him had even dared imagine. He had broken the empire of kings, the great Persian Empire, and stood as master of half the known world. But victory is a dangerous thing. It changes a man, slowly, silently, from within. Alexander, once the humble student of Aristotle, began to see himself not as a mortal, but as something greater. His men had seen it too. When he rode into Babylon, crowds poured from every street, Persians bowing, Greeks cheering, priests offering garlands. To them, he was not a conqueror. He was a god who walked among men. In Babylon's grand palace, Alexander sat on the throne once ruled by Darius the Great. Gold and jewels surrounded him, but his mind was restless. The battle had been won, yet peace brought him no comfort. He wanted more. He began adopting Persian customs, wearing their robes, performing their rituals, even demanding his generals bow before him in the Persian way. His Macedonian companions were horrified. These were men who had marched beside him since Greece, warriors who bled for him, who still saw him as one of them. But now their king seemed distant, veiled in silk and ceremony. And yet Alexander had his reasons. He was no longer just a Greek or a Macedonian ruler. He was lord of a vast and diverse empire. To unite East and West, he had to become both. He believed that if the world could be ruled by one man, not through fear, but through fusion, then maybe the divisions of men could finally end. But idealism is rarely understood by those who fight for it. Tensions grew. In private halls, whispers spread among his officers. The king has forgotten who he is. And then came tragedy. One night, in a drunken quarrel, his closest friend and general, Cletus the Black, the man who once saved his life, spoke words that struck deep. He accused Alexander of betraying his father's legacy, of becoming Persian, of forgetting Macedonia. The words burned like fire. Alexander, consumed by pride and rage, snatched a spear and drove it through Cletus's chest. The hall fell silent. The great conqueror stood frozen, his hands trembling, eyes wide. He realized what he had done. His fury had killed the very man who had once called him brother. For days Alexander locked himself away, refusing food, tormented by guilt. The hero of the world, the man who could defeat empires, could not defeat his own heart. But fate gave him no rest. News came from the north. Rebellions had begun to stir, old loyalties cracking under the weight of conquest. To keep the empire together, Alexander did what he always did. He marched. He led his men east, farther than any Greek had ever gone, through deserts, over mountains, across the edge of the known world. He entered Persia's final strongholds, hunting down Darius III, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. But fate had already caught up with the Persian king. When Alexander found him, Darius was already dying, betrayed by his own satraps. The great king of Persia lay bleeding in the sand. Alexander knelt beside him, covered his body with his royal cloak, and wept. He had not come to destroy Persia. He had come to inherit it. In that moment, he became not just king of Macedonia, but king of Asia, ruler of a vast realm stretching from the Mediterranean to the mountains of Afghanistan. The world had no equal to him, not Caesar, not Napoleon, not even Genghis Khan. He was the living embodiment of ambition itself. But ambition, like a flame, consumes what it cannot control. In the years that followed, Alexander began to chase something greater than conquest: immortality. He declared himself the son of Zeus Ammon, demanded divine honors, and spoke of founding a single world where Greek and Persian, East and West, would live as one. He married Roxana, a Persian princess, and ordered thousands of his soldiers to marry local women. an attempt to bind two civilizations together by blood. But the more he dreamed of unity, the more his men felt divided. Many believed their king had gone mad, drunk not on wine, but on power. And when he pushed farther east, into the unknown lands of India, even his most loyal soldiers began to lose faith. The campaign was brutal: endless rain, foreign beasts, jungles thick as nightmares. Yet Alexander pressed on. Every battle became more desperate, every victory more costly. And still he would not stop, until the Battle of the Hydaspes. There, on the banks of a raging river, he faced King Porus, a ruler who refused to bow. Porus fought with war elephants, towering monsters draped in armor, shaking the earth beneath their feet. The battle was chaos, thunder, screams, blood, and mud. Yet Alexander's strategy, his unmatched vision, once again triumphed. Porus was captured, wounded, yet unbroken. When Alexander asked how he wished to be treated, Porus replied, "Like a king." Alexander smiled and did exactly that. He restored Porus to his throne, even expanded his kingdom. Because for the first time, Alexander saw in another man what he saw in himself: courage, dignity, greatness. But the victory came at a price. His men, weary and broken, refused to march farther. They had followed him for 8 years, through deserts and storms, across half the world, and now they wanted to go home. For the first time, Alexander faced something he could not conquer: his own army's will. Standing before them, drenched in the monsoon rain, he spoke not as a king, but as a brother. He reminded them of where they had come from, the dusty fields of Macedonia, and how together they had achieved the impossible. But the silence that followed was not loyalty, it was exhaustion. Alexander turned away, tears mixing with rain. Even the greatest conqueror could not command the hearts of men forever. He ordered the retreat, back to Babylon, back toward destiny.
Part 4. The Fall of the Conqueror. The Price of Immortality. The march back from India was not a victory parade. It was a funeral in slow motion. Alexander had led his men beyond the edges of the known world, but what awaited them now was not glory. It was the desert. The Gedrosian Desert, a wasteland of fire and emptiness. For weeks, the army trudged through the shifting sands under a merciless sun. Thousands fell to thirst, hunger, and madness. The golden dream of empire turned to dust before their eyes. And yet, Alexander kept moving. He refused to take the easier coastal route. No, he wanted to share the suffering of his soldiers, to show that even a king bleeds beneath the same sun. When his men found a small flask of water and offered it to him, he poured it onto the sand, saying, "If my men cannot drink, neither will I." That moment, brief but unforgettable, reignited something. They followed him still, not out of hope, but out of love and loyalty, because Alexander, even at his most broken, was still their king. When they finally reached Persia, they were shadows of the men who had once left Macedonia. And yet, Alexander was already thinking beyond the horizon. He began rebuilding Babylon, not as a city, but as the heart of the world, a capital of cultures, languages, and ideas. There, Greek architects worked beside Persian artisans. Egyptian priests shared temples with scholars from India. It was a vision unlike any before it, a united empire where East met West in harmony. But the world wasn't ready for Alexander's dream. Not yet. His generals whispered. Old loyalties fractured, jealousies festered in the corridors of power. The same men who had once shared his battles now feared his growing godlike ambition. Meanwhile, Alexander's mind began to unravel. He saw omens everywhere, a dying bird falling from the sky, the whisper of priests warning of betrayal. Some say he drank too much. Others say it was the ghosts of those he had lost, his father, Hephaestion, Clitus, haunting him in the silence of the night. But one loss broke him more than any wound ever could. Hephaestion, his closest friend, his mirror, his soul, fell ill and died suddenly in Ecbatana. The news shattered Alexander. He tore his clothes, refused food, and lay by Hephaestion's body for days. He declared him a demigod, built shrines in his name, and ordered an empire-wide mourning. The conqueror, who had stood unbroken against armies, now wept like a child. In that grief, the line between king and god blurred completely. He began to see death not as an end, but as a door to eternity. Soon after, Alexander planned his greatest vision yet, the conquest of Arabia. The maps were drawn, the fleets were being built, the orders prepared. Even as fever consumed him, he spoke of new worlds to explore, lands beyond the seas, empires yet unborn. But destiny had already made its decision. In June 323 BCE, Babylon was alive with celebration, banquets, sacrifices, songs of victory. The air was thick with wine, incense, and prophecy. Alexander attended one feast after another, laughing, drinking, planning, dreaming. Then one night, he felt a burning pain, a fever that no water could cool. At first, he ignored it, as he always had. But each day, the heat grew stronger. His voice weakened. His breath became shallow. He could no longer stand. His generals gathered in silence around his bed. The man who had conquered the world now lay powerless before them, his body drenched in sweat, his spirit flickering like a candle in the storm. And yet, even as death closed in, Alexander's eyes burned with fire. When one of his commanders asked who should rule after him, he whispered the words that would ignite centuries of chaos: "To the strongest." Those were his last commands, ambiguous, dangerous, prophetic. He raised his hand one final time, signaling for his soldiers. The men who had followed him from Greece to India were brought into his chamber, one by one. Too weak to speak, he simply nodded at them, his eyes filled with tears and pride. They say that as he took his last breath, a strange silence fell over Babylon, as if the world itself held still. Alexander the Great was dead. He was only 32 years old. But death could not contain his legend. His generals, the Diadochi, tore the empire apart in their hunger for power. Macedonia, Egypt, and Persia, all divided, all bleeding. The unity he dreamed dissolved into war. His body was stolen, his tomb hidden, his legacy twisted by those who claimed to follow him. And yet, across time, his name endured. In the centuries that followed, kings, emperors, and conquerors all sought to be another Alexander. Caesar carried his image, Napoleon studied his campaigns. Even centuries later, his shadow lingered in every empire that rose and fell. Because Alexander was not just a man. He was a mirror, reflecting humanity's greatest strength and its greatest flaw, the hunger to be remembered. He conquered the world, but could not conquer himself. He united nations, but divided his own soul. He sought immortality and found it. Not in life, but in legend. And maybe that's what makes him eternal. For as long as the stars burn above the deserts of Babylon and the ruins of Persepolis whisper in the wind, the name of Alexander will not fade. He was mortal, but his dream was not.
Part 5. Legacy of a Legend. The Echo That Never Died. The world without Alexander was like a ship without its captain. Vast, restless, and drifting toward chaos. His death left a silence so deep that even empires trembled. In Babylon, his body lay unburied for days as his generals argued over who would claim the throne. There was no heir strong enough, no leader worthy enough. His wife, Roxana, was pregnant with his son, but the child was still unborn, a symbol of an empire that would never be whole again. When they finally placed his body in a golden sarcophagus, they believed they were burying a man. But in truth, they were planting a myth. The great conqueror who had united the world was now gone, and the unity he forged began to crack like glass. His most trusted commanders, the Diadochi, turned on one another. Ptolemy seized Egypt and took Alexander's body with him, claiming it as a relic of divine power. Seleucus took the east, founding a dynasty that would rule from Babylon to India. Antigonus and Lysimachus fought for Greece and Asia Minor. Brother turned against brother. Friend became foe. The dream of one world, of harmony between East and West, dissolved into blood and ambition. But even as his empire shattered, his name refused to die. In Egypt, Ptolemy built a tomb fit for a god, the Soma, a golden sanctuary in Alexandria, the city that still bore his name. Pilgrims came from across the world to gaze upon Alexander's body, preserved in crystal, as if asleep. Caesar wept when he saw it. Augustus bowed before it. For centuries, rulers visited that tomb, not to mourn, but to draw strength from the man who had defied the impossible. Yet even the tomb of a god cannot escape time. The sands of Egypt swallowed it. Its exact location remains a mystery, lost to history, perhaps forever. And still, people search, because finding Alexander's tomb isn't just about finding a man. It's about finding meaning, proof that greatness can outlast death. But Alexander's true legacy was never meant to lie in stone. It lived on in the world he left behind. In the cities he built, Alexandria, Kandahar, Bucephala, where Greek temples rose beside Eastern palaces and cultures blended like colors in a new dawn. In his army, men from every corner of the known world, marching not as conquerors, but as brothers. In the spread of Hellenism, where Greek philosophy, science, and art mixed with Persian, Indian, and Egyptian traditions, creating a new world of ideas. He had changed not just borders, but minds. And through that fusion, the seeds of the modern world were planted. Aristotle once taught him that true greatness was not to rule others, but to understand them. Perhaps Alexander never fully learned that lesson, but he made the world learn it for him. For centuries after his death, his name became legend, whispered by storytellers, worshipped by kings, feared by enemies. To the Greeks, he was a hero. To the Persians, a destroyer. To the Egyptians, a god. To the East, a prophet. In every culture he touched, he became something different, yet always something great. And perhaps that's the power of legends. They don't belong to history. They belong to humanity. Every time a leader dreams of uniting the world, every time a soldier refuses to give up against impossible odds, every time a civilization reaches beyond its limits, there's a shadow of Alexander standing beside them. He is there in the courage of explorers who cross oceans, in the ambition of thinkers who challenge the heavens, in the hunger of nations that rise, fall, and rise again. His story is a mirror, showing us both our highest potential and our deepest flaws. Because to conquer the world is not the same as to understand it, and to seek immortality is to risk losing your soul in the pursuit. In the end, Alexander's greatest conquest was not of land or kings, but of time itself. More than 2,000 years have passed since he took his final breath in Babylon, and yet his name still echoes, in marble statues, in lost ruins, in the pages of history. From the dusty battlefields of Issus to the crowded streets of Alexandria, the legend of the boy from Macedon endures. He began as a prince chasing his father's shadow. He became a warrior chasing the horizon, and he died as a god chasing eternity. But through it all, one truth remains unshaken. Alexander the Great was not born to rule the world. He was born to change it. And he did. Even now, when the stars rise over the deserts he once crossed, it's said the wind still carries his name, whispered softly, endlessly, as if the earth itself remembers the footsteps of the man who would not stop. From struggles to a great king, from a mortal to a myth, Alexander did not just conquer lands, he conquered time.